You load a web page, you have an ad slot, a user needs to be served that ad. There are a bunch of ad networks that are actually competing for that ad slot. Now, what determines success and therefore revenue for these companies is how quickly you're able to decide how much to bid, and number two, how quickly you can serve the ad, because that's your quality score. So there's your bid and then there's your quality score. Now, most product management problem spaces in AdTech revolve around optimizing these two.
Hi guys, we are back again. This is episode 10 of Minimum Mile podcast, and today we have Anand MS. He's the Associate Director of Product at Zeta. It's a fintech company. I'll let him speak about the great work he's been doing at Zeta. And also, Anand has been a teacher at PM School for I think almost 3 years, or maybe more than 3 years. He's been taking the much revered module 8, which is on interview prep. And trust me when I say this, I think that's the only module that we have not had any other teacher. And we never thought about it. I think for all the other 7 modules of PM School, we have had like 3 or 4 teachers. And like we keep rehashing depending on, like, we sometimes try to improve the quality, or we feel, hey, can we tweak the module? But I think module 8 is the only one wherein we have had no impact. In fact, neither Ankit and I have added any of the content as well on the slides. So yeah, over to you, Anand. If you can just give a brief of what you've been working on, like your brief introduction before we jump into the
Yeah,
topic.
thanks for having me, guys. It's always, I mean, I still remember the day you reached out and then said, "Hey, we're starting something called PM School. Are you interested in being a part of it?" And I think, I said, "Yeah, I mean, let's do it." And it's been wonderful working with you guys, honestly. It's been fun speaking to people who want to crack into product management, and almost give them a bit of a reality check when they do that. It's been fulfilling, even for me. And you tend to. I was just watching one of the first videos that we did, and then how content has actually changed over time. So it's been wonderful being working with you guys, and long may that continue. Long may PM School grow, and looking forward to doing much more. So apart from PM School, I work at a banking technology company called Zeta. Um, we're about 6, 7 years old, about 1,500 people strong today, with offices in Bangalore, primarily Bangalore, product engineering, etc. Small office in Hyderabad, a small office in Mumbai, with sales presence in the markets that we operate at. I'm inching up to 5 years at Zeta, which has by far been the longest stint ever. Sort of testament to the fact of how much there is to do, how much I'm loving the company, and how it feels like still day one at Zeta. So it's been a good journey. Again, long may that continue. We're sort of doing newer things as we go. We're learning new things about the banking and financial sector. And each time we learn something new, we realize there's an opportunity to do something better or do something new. And that's sort of keeping us really, really fresh. So um, just to give you a sense of the quick evolution of Zeta, we started in 2016 between Ramki and Bhavin. Um, and of course, we started with our prepaid business. We were working in the corporate meal space. We were powering the digital meal vouchers, and some of you who are listening in may also have used the Zeta cards. And that's actually the avatar that people actually remember of Zeta. So when we say Zeta, oh, the meal voucher guys. We used to be. We're much more than that today. And in that journey around 2017, RBI came in with a regulation to say that all meal vouchers have to be digital and not paper based. That sort of put a set of the large players out of the market. And it was around that time that we announced a strategic partnership with Sodexo in India, where we were going to power the technology platform. Zeta's technology platform would power Sodexo's meal voucher business in India. And that became a fairly important business vertical for us. As a part of that strategic initiative, we also were the de facto technology platform for their entire global business. So Sodexo operates out of multiple countries. And then we did more than just meals. So we went to the entire enterprise payment space, where we were solving benefits, rewards and recognition, AR and AP sort of problems in the enterprise B2B space. And that was one of our verticals. What we also did, which is what I in fact started off with, was within the meal voucher business itself, we were saying, hey, you know what? When people get that 2,200 rupees a month, where do they spend it most at? And we realized that most people spend it in their office cafeteria. It's the simplest and the most obvious place to spend that money. And then we realized that there's a large opportunity to actually provide a great digital cafeteria experience. And we started our merchant charter at that time. We had something called Zeta Express, which I was leading, and subsequently Sunset, which was largely into providing digital cafeteria experiences. So right from inventory management to procurement to menu management to ordering to payment to actual food experience. So you can order, you get a KOT, you get a buzz on your phone when the food is ready, you go pick it up, and making it a curious cafeteria. We were working there. Of course, market dynamics sort of meant that we couldn't scale. We couldn't find the right kind of business model to operate there. We learned our lessons. We sunsetted, and then subsequently I worked on some of our enterprise payments platforms, built out our rewards and recognition platform, built out a marketplace platform for earn and burn journeys, which sort of we sold to one of our partners in Europe. And then subsequently, over the last year and a half, I've been responsible for building out our credit card digital experiences layer. In fact, we've sort of gone from that to now building out a fully comprehensive engagement banking SaaS, which is what I'm sort of taking care of now at Zeta. So, it's been close to 5 years, but it actually feels like 3 or 4 different jobs, really, different problem spaces. But yeah, it's been extremely exciting and extremely fulfilling.
Awesome, Anand. So first of all, congratulations on completing or almost completing 5 years at Zeta and three plus years at PM School, right?
Yeah.
And let's start from the start, right? So can you share about your transition from consulting and corporate strategy to product management? And what essentially inspired the shift? I was going through your LinkedIn profile and you've written that media.net came on campus for hiring, right?
Yeah.
And I think even before that, you had already transitioned into product.
Yeah.
Right. So what was, what made you transition into product back in 2015, 2016?
Sure. So my career has largely been in two parts. I spent about 4 years of my career just exploring what the hell I wanted to do in life. So I got some good advice early on in my career. Right out of college, the opportunity was, of course, to work in a bunch of startups, do something on your own right from the get-go. But I still felt that a strong grounding in consulting would sort of give me that appropriate baseline. Just good practices, good etiquette, professionalism, some of the understated things that make people successful, even in the way you articulate or the way you write. And I think to that, my 2 years at Deloitte, I owe a lot. Learned some incredible stuff, built an amazing network of great people at Deloitte. That was back in 2012 to 14. And then around 2014, I felt, I think I've gotten what I wanted out of Deloitte. And then Deloitte itself, somebody from Deloitte gave me my next break. And again, I was exploring. I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? And in 2014, I actually had an admit from XLRI. And at that point of time, I spoke to my mentor and I said, hey, you know what? I'm planning to join. What do you think? Who himself happened to be an Excel alum. And he said, you know what? You'll do this for 2 years, but you know what? I'm starting something here in the education space. Come do the heavy lifting for me. I don't have a job description for you. I don't have a role defined for you. Come in, be the foot soldier, get this up and running with me, and you learn more in 1 year than what you wouldn't do in any school. And I thought, hey, you know what? That's fantastic. Let me. It also gives me a broad canvas to do multiple things. So I said, okay, fine. I declined the invite, and then I went ahead and joined what was then called HCL Talent Care. HCL Talent Care was in the source skill staff business, right? So we used to go work with tier 4, tier 3 kind of engineering schools, pick up students from there, put them through a paid intensive learning program, and then provide staff out services to companies in IT, in BFSI, in analytics, etc. And I've done literally everything from AOP program planning to ATL and BTL marketing to field sales in these tier 3, tier 4 cities to doing civil contract negotiations for our campuses, etc. So it sort of gave me that wide stroke. And as a part of that, one of the things that we built out was called JQ, which is Jobability Quotient. And as a part of that, we actually assembled what ended up being one of the most comprehensive end-to-end assessment engines that were ever built, where somebody could be tested on a variety of topics, including spoken English. And then at the end of the day, you get a composite score that you would then use to determine where you stand from a skill matrix standpoint for a particular role. And then you'd go through the training program from then on. And I absolutely loved it. I loved working in tech. I loved solving problems like that of scale, of deployability, of things like that. And then somebody told me that, and by the way, until this time, I didn't know what product management was. This was still way back in 2014, 15. I still didn't know. I mean, someone said, hey, you know what you did sort of feels and looks like what product managers do. Why don't you consider doing that? And in fact, that was when I decided, okay, so coinciding with HCL Talent Care was sort of getting shut down at the end of 1 year. The business didn't click. And we sort of then, I decided to move on. And I used to intern at a place called iQuantai in 2010 when I was an engineering student. In the summer, I used to write a website copy for them. And then I was just talking to their founder, who, again, one of my mentors, somebody I respect hugely, and the CEO, and he said, hey, you know what? Come on board. Like, there's a product that I've been meaning to build, which is to predict the future of search on the internet. It's a fairly validated problem space in the sense that there is a market demand for a solution like this. Why don't you come on board and build it? And of course, it wasn't the primary product that they were building, but I had the opportunity to actually do something in that space. And then, and that's how I broke into product management. I didn't know what it was. I got into the role knowing nothing about product management, about diligence, about rigor, about process, about what does discovery mean. What I didn't even know what agile meant. Right? I didn't. I got in and I learned it on the job. So, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I got, because somebody to take a bet on you and say, no, this guy will learn. I think that break is what mattered to me most, right? Somebody put that faith in me, and spent a year there. Built out a beta version of the product. It's called iFuturist. I think it's still alive. Did a couple of closed betas, validated that experiment, and then I came to a stage in my career where I knew two things. Actually, I knew three things. One, I knew that I wanted to be a product manager. I thought it was incredibly exciting and fascinating to be dead in center of pretty much every function in a particular company. The second is that by that time I'd fallen in love with online marketing, AdTech, and all of that. And I knew that I wanted to be in AdTech. And the third is that I knew that I was coming to a stage where I had to make more money, right? Because when you're exploring, money is not what you're chasing. But then when you get to 25, 26, you then realize, boss, you've got to start earning a little more than what you're making right now. So that's when ISB happened. I spent a year at ISB. Again, a very considered choice. Wanted to be in India. Continue to be a very big believer in the India growth story and what all of us are going to do together in the next decade and a half. So the focus was to be in India. That was the most appropriate school for me. And then I went to ISB, spent a year, came back. And when you're looking for opportunities in product management in AdTech, you really don't have a lot of options. The one is always Google, and the other one is media.net. Like, who else?
Media.net,
yeah. So so I sort of joined media.net right out of campus. And by that time, I mean, from my articulation of my journey, I haven't written a line of code in my life. I'm not a tech guy, right? In the sense, I love tech, but I haven't written code. And here I am joining AdTech as a product manager, where it's fundamentally a systems product, where your end customer is not a person. Your end customer is another system that's going to consume what you're building. The product itself is almost a headless product where you're building statistical models. And I was actually working on Adfraud and brand safety solutions, where we were sort of building models to identify, sophisticated bots that click on ads and sort of leak ad revenue for brands. And it's a systems product. And here I am, a guy person who kind of code in his life, person worked on large scale systems at all, again coming and say, okay, so I want to be a product manager in this domain and sector. I think it, like, again, some sense of false bravado at that time to say, hey, you know what, dekh lenge. Like, let me learn what's the worst that'll happen. So that took me in. I spent 2 wonderful years, and 2 years where we built out another 0 to 1 system, adopted it across various systems, found some sort of commercial success with the product. Um, and then, like, by that time, I had actually overcome a lot of my tech handicap, right? You can't be successful in the super long term as a product manager if you don't know how code is written, or if your engineers don't respect you. And in fact, that was an investment into myself to say, I'm going to put myself in this difficult situation. I'm going to learn my way out of it because it's going to be too expensive to learn later on. Right. So I always joke that my most technical role was right after my MBA. In fact, people do their MBAs to get away from that, but I almost did it to right after my MBA. But again, everyone's journey is different, right? And then sort of media.net happened, a couple of years there, and then I felt the need to pivot into a different sector, do something different. In fact, build experiential products as well. But by that time, I'd actually fallen in love with the culture at media.net, the direct time media.net culture, the amount of agency that you get to make decisions, the kind of people that you get to work with, the kind of just the culture that permeates within the company is, I mean, once you get a taste of it, it's very, very hard to sort of not want more of it. And then that's around in 2019 when I made my move to Zeta. And then, it's been the Zeta journey from then. So honestly, my transition to product management was purely by accident, in the sense that I didn't know that this was called product management. I sort of knew that I wanted to solve problems. I've always been a guy who likes working with different, it's almost like I like being jack of all. I love working with legal teams, with finance teams, with program teams, with marketing, with this and that. So, and the only place where I got to do all of that in a fulfilling manner was in product management. So, it was almost the only choice that I had given the constraints that I'd put for myself. But yeah, that's my journey.
Interesting. It's a lot similar to, how Nikunj and I also got into product, because at that point of time, there were no, streamlined processes for hiring product managers.
Yes.
And most of the founders were also young. They were also figuring out product management.
Yep.
And the same thing happened with me. The founder of Tiny Owl, he called me, he said, we are trying to figure out product management at Tiny Owl. Why don't you take the lead? Now, I didn't know that taking the lead would mean, doing business development as well, talking to the risk team as well, doing photo shoot of, food items as well, right? Anything to get the job done. And eventually we like calling it product management.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting. You mentioned Deloitte, because we have had so many PM school grads who have been from Deloitte, who have been a business technology analyst for 2 or 3 years, and then they transition into an APM or a PM role. So Deloitte definitely seems like a good training ground for future product managers, right?
Not just future product managers, right? I think, and it's not just Deloitte, it's actually most of the good consulting firms.
Consulting firms, yeah.
Yeah, they change the way that you think fundamentally. Your thinking frameworks are clear, you're concise, you get things done in a certain way, and I think that just helps.
Correct. I want to, have a follow-up question on your media.net experience. So all the PMs whom we have interacted at media.net, all of them have this unanimous thing that it is very engineering heavy, and rightly so, right? Could you talk to us about the importance of, system design for a product manager, right? What the importance of, knowing how systems work for a PM, because most of the roles in India have been very generalist PM roles. If you talk about a B2C PM, or, they're not as engineering heavy, so to say, in terms of knowledge, but it definitely helps if you have a good technical know-how of, system scaling distributed systems, or, how you can scale systems. Essentially, system design is what I wanted to ask, right? The importance of system
Sure.
design and product management.
Okay. So, and when it comes to AdTech, right? I think we can take one step back. It's not just scale systems. It's actually the ability not just to design, but to actually understand to begin with,
Understand, yeah.
right? I think what happens is, especially even AdTech, which is a fairly mature sector, in the sense that there's a market monopoly. There's a very clear market monopoly. There's Google that runs about 70 to 80% of the business. There's Bing, and then the rest of the people, and Facebook and the other ad networks that run about another 15-20% of the business. And then you have a long tail, right? And literally, you've got very profitable companies who are just doing that 5 to 10% kind of work, right? Now, when you're in this industry, fundamentally, what different? Now, everybody is competing for the same ad slot, right? You're competing with Google, you're competing with Meta, you're competing with everybody for the same ad slot. So you load a web page, you have an ad slot, a user needs to be served that ad. There are a bunch of ad networks that are actually competing for that ad slot. Now, what determines success and therefore revenue for these companies is how quickly you're able to decide how much to bid, and number two, how quickly you can serve the ad, because that's your quality score. So there's your bid and then there's your quality score. Now, most product management problem spaces in AdTech revolve around optimizing these two, right? Which means that how would you improve your quality score? How do you make an ad render faster? Unless you truly understand your system, your architecture, how else are you going to find inefficiencies that you can work on? Unless you understand what you're already doing, right from choice of database, how your caching strategies, all of that, end to end, unless you understand that with a certain degree of authority, etc., how are you then going to say, I'm going to come up with something brilliantly innovative in this space? So it becomes engineering heavy because fundamentally the money is there, right? And as a product manager, if you're building a product and you want it to be commercially successful, you got to move that revenue needle, especially in AdTech. If revenue is, the North Star of the North Star metrics and in AdTech, right? You got to keep making money from a unit economics perspective. And you can't do that unless you know the system top down, you know how it works, you know how you communicate with other systems, etc. So so yes, it is engineering first, because that's how you solve problems. That's how you identify problems in the first place, and that's how you begin to solve problems. So it's only natural that as a product manager, you're expected to sort of give engineering and system design the kind of respect that it deserves, especially in an industry like that.
Understood.
Got it. Got it. And then, think of an aspiring product manager, and you have gone through that journey, right? Back in the day, trying to get into media. And I understand having a strong technical background helps, but if someone is not from a technical background and he's looking at, now I have an upcoming interview, let's say in 2 weeks in media.net, how do I, let's say, start? Where do I start? What are the three things I should be learning? Let's say I am looking at a company like media.net, something in the ad tech space. What are the challenges I should be sort of be sure of from an interview lens? And obviously, my learning is not just cracking the interview, after the interview. So if you can sort of pre-interview and post-interview, what are the things a candidate should target learning with respect to different domains? If we can sort of structure that, hey, these are the three things you need to think of from an interview
Sure.
lens. And post the interview, maybe you'll need to sort of get better at ABC.
Sure. Okay, so I'll actually take one step back. And one of the most important things for any aspiring product manager who wants to get into any industry, not just that tech, which has a certain moat to it, right? And the moat is really, if you want to work in financial services or fintech, you've got to understand a little bit of that coming in. If you want to get into AdTech, you need to understand a bit of AdTech before you come in. And it must excite you sufficiently for you to say, I feel comfortable going neck deep into this problem space and dig out opportunity spaces here. So the first thing that I would encourage anyone to do before getting into any industry that has a learning moat associated with it is to be damn sure that you actually want to do it, right? Because it's very easy. And I've seen a lot of people just come in, get frustrated by the amount of depth that is required to just do one little thing. And then sort of they just move on very quickly because, you know what, it's not worth my time. Because then people start fearing, oh, am I always going to be an AdTech PM? Am I always going to be known as a fintech PM? And I cannot go into other industries because I go so deep here. Legitimate cause of concern, but you've got to be sure that you want to do it. So it's not for everybody. And, you know, that's just the first thing. So be very careful and mindful rather than careful about making the choice and decision to actually work in a industry with a moat. That's point number one. Point number two, once you're convinced yourself, there are only two ways. And I repeat, and I say some of this in our in session 8 of the PM School cohort, which is learning happens in two levels. You learn conceptually and you learn contextually. Conceptual learning is what you learn through book, through reading, through primary and secondary research, through content consumption, through MOOCs and courses that you do. Contextual learning is what you pick up on the job. Now, when you get into an interview sort of loop with a company like Media.net, for example, there are three things that the company will look for. The first, is this guy technically proficient to be a technology platform product manager in AdTech? Okay, that is the number one thing that they will sniff out. And either by virtue of your background and what appears on your CV, or by virtue of contextual work. So for me, it was context that brought me. So because I understood the online marketing landscape really, really well, even though I had a tech handicap, Media.net thought, hey, you know what, maybe this guy understands the sector. So he learned, right? Or you got to be the other way around, which is so strong with technical system design, etc., that you will learn the industry. And you demonstrate that hunger and that willingness by understanding a little bit of what AdTech means. What are the different sets of players in the market? Who's a demand side platform? Who's a supply side platform? Who's an ad exchange? Who's a what's a data platform? So on and so forth, right? And how do all these broad boxes talk to each other when you're trying to serve an ad? How do ads get served? Are you curious? Do you understand the basics? Do you understand Internet 101? Do you know how web pages load? Do you know what a CDN is, right? So these are basic things, but awareness of all of this sort of gets tested in the interview process. That's the first level of filtering that happens. The second most important thing is your ability to interpret data. AdTech fundamentally deals with incredible volume of information and data, and this is raw data. And as a product manager, you must have the ability to make sense of this data. Not just write queries to sort of get your data on a particular metric, but also make sense whether this metric is, so if you see a 5% or a, let's say for instance, your ads are not visible to, let's say, 70% of the consumers. If that's a metric that you sort of dug out. Is that good? Is that bad? If bad, why is it bad? What should it be? And what are the levers in my hand to influence that? So your ability to interpret data is extremely important. And you will not be successful if you can't do that in a sector like AdTech. So that's the second thing that gets tested. So brush up on your data skills, brush up on metrics, what are the right metrics in this industry, so on and so forth. The third is diligence. In fact, product strategy is very overrated in places like AdTech because the strategy gets determined at a very high level, right? And you coming in as a first time or a early stage product manager will have very little influence on product strategy. The decision gets made to say, I want to solve this problem. What you inherit is, okay, I want to do this, solve this for me. And therefore, your execution rigor is very important. So, in fact, you typically get a case study and then you'll sort of go through this case study where what is assessed is really how good is your PRD? If you're writing a PRD, how detailed is it? How are you able to think of these edge cases? How are you able to really put perspective to and make sense to an engineer? Or are you sort of very randomly at a very high level making these statements, which is not impractical or unimplementable by your engineering team? How rational and grounded are you with what you do? these things really get tested. So diligence and execution rigor is extremely important as you break into industries like this. The devil is always in the detail, especially in moat industries and scaled industry. The devil is in the detail. So how deep can you go with the detail? These are sort of the three things that that get measured. So in terms of preparation, of course, 1 and 2 we covered. In terms of your case study, I'd say invest a lot of time on the case study. It's go as deep as you can, get it reviewed by a couple of people if you're able to, and then be prepared to defend really well. So it's almost like presenting your thesis and sitting in front of a jury and defending your thesis, right? So it's as important as that. So those are my recommendations for somebody who's trying to look into an industry like this.
Thank you, Anand. Like super detailed. So I've made notes. I think I'm thinking of it as like two different blocks. One is your fundamental skills, that is your domain propensity, and like proficiency, right? Tech awareness, and like that's essentially your first block. I think that's more a factor of like how much effort you have put in, or basically your body of work, the first 2 3 years of
Yeah,
your work experience. Have you sort of built a baseline understanding of a certain sector? Obviously, maybe like it's 5% experience, one year of experience, and like an openness to learning technology, and like as you rightly said, like having a sense of how internet works and different sort of
yeah,
technology concepts. And the second block, I would say, is core skills, which I feel is more something that can be taught, which is essentially
mm-hmm.
your data powers and like execution vigor. I think interpreting data, this is like a soft skill that you can build in a short amount of time. You can obviously get better at it. You can reach like a 40% like productivity, and then obviously 40 to 100 is like a factor of how much time
Yeah,
you spend in that.
yeah,
And like execution, again, I feel you can understand how execution works and get better at like your diligence. Like, hey, I can work across like XYZ constraints, but again, you get better at it with the experience. So like, I think these are the four.
absolutely.
I love the like different layers to it. And I think most of the people, you ask them, hey, what is it you're testing in a product manager interview? I think it's like two or three of these, and more of our.
Absolutely. Yes. Or the simplest thing, join PM school. Sorry, that's a plug, but is that allowed?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You can say that after every line. So yeah. Yeah. Moving on from, AdTech, we want to talk about your experience at Zeta, right? And you are, I think, one of the early product managers at Zeta as well, right? So we see that you're now building credit card experience at Zeta. So can you describe your role in building the credit card experience on Zeta stack? You mentioned that Zeta was initially known as, the voucher company you guys got to be known as. So how did you build upon that use case and, ventured into the credit card experience?
Sure. So I think over time, and of course, like it wasn't my decision, right? Like it's also Bhavin and the
Of
rest of the
course. Yeah.
leadership sort of determining what problems and what industries to be in. I think what we realized on the back of the work that we did in the prepaid business, um, we had and we still, and we have a platform that is so powerful that we can support pretty much any asset or liability product for banks. There exists a problem for banks where they aren't able to innovate as quickly as they would like to. Not for the lack of desire, but because they're handicapped by their own process, their own systems, and their own legacy technology that hampers them. Right? They know, like banks know that every bank wants to give customers a kick-ass customer experience. It's not that they don't know. I mean, they're not fools, right? They're really aware, but they're not able to because they're handicapped by certain things. And our hypothesis, very simply put, is that, you know what, we want to help you get rid of that handicap. By working with us, you will have access to a platform that will allow you to build these great experiences on top of us, right? And not necessarily be hampered by, without making any changes to your existing legacy infra. You can keep your business running as it is, but for all your new lines of business, you can work with us. By the way, our system, your system can talk to each other and can be in sync completely. So that's a very powerful proposition in our experience for banks. And naturally, as we sort of started looking at asset and liability products and looking at the markets that we wanted to sort of operate in, the credit card business was something that's extremely attractive to us, especially from a North American market standpoint. So that's sort of how it started, to say that we want to focus on on certain liability products for banks in a particular market. You typically answer two questions: where to play and how to win. Where to play was a clear decision to begin with. We were in India and Europe, and then we expanded to North America. And how to win, each of these markets are different. In India, we win differently. In Europe, we try and win differently. But in the US market, we try and win differently. And in order to win differently in the US market, our first, of course, the first product is going to be, or is already, credit card experiences. But then on top of that, we're doing much, much more than that right now. In terms of what it's been, so in fact, it's you're essentially my over the last year and a half. I've actually been responsible for validating our own sales pitch, right? So what we did was we went and sold our banking platform. We called it Tachyon. We went and sold Tachyon Credit to a fintech in the US. But this fintech is obviously small, and they were just starting up. They had all of 8 people. They don't have a product engineering team to actually build the experience, use the powerful APIs, and build experiences on top of it. And then said, hey, you know what? Why don't you do it for us? And I said, sure, let's do it. So we built using our own platform. We built another layer on top of it, whereby we brought in all the surround systems that a credit card needs to function. So right from origination to decisioning to card printing to delivery and so on and so forth. Integrated everybody onto our platform, created that tech stack for the fintech itself, and then built an app on top of it. So that was almost our POC to see, hey, is it really easy to implement our own platform? We've been going and saying it can, but that's a sales view. What is the real proof of the pudding? And I think over the last year, we've grown. The amount of confidence that we now have in our platform is tremendous because we've made it happen. And we've made it happen in a way that allows us to believe that it can be done not just by ourselves, but by anybody who uses these platforms because it's that ready, right? And of course, in that process, we learned what the platform needs to do, what the orchestrating layer has to do, so on and so forth. But those are learnings that would normally happen as you evolve a particular product. I think from then on, what we then realized is the more that we pitch to banks everywhere, the more we realize that, you know what, banks still don't have product engineering teams. They don't have teams to think consumer first. They don't have team. They want to do it, but they don't have the manpower to do it, right? Which sort of makes it a very interesting problem space for us to solve. And then we said, hey, you know what? Let's build SaaS. Let's build our engagement banking SaaS, where this SaaS talks directly with our Tachyon platform. You buy both SaaS offerings from Zeta. Use this for the platform core product issuance, which is Tachyon. You buy our engagement SaaS that will allow you access to a out-of-the-box solution where you can work with every vendor that we pre-integrated with at a SaaS price. You can work. You have a backend for your app that you can just you can stand an app up within 2 to 3 months using our backend for front end, etc., using our modules, and it's all there ready to be multi-tenant, etc. So the ability for you to scale, of course, there's always going to be what is SaaS, what is customization, and so we're going to figure that out as we go, right? So it's not all figured out yet, but that's always going to happen in this business. But what we've realized is that there's a tremendous opportunity to operate in this space. And we've actually seen a bunch of companies, like, you look at Backbase, you look at Alchemy. These are companies that have multi-billion-dollar market caps who are doing purely this, which is just engagement banking. In our assessment, don't even scratch the surface of what you really can do with engagement banking, right? The way that we want to move at Zeta, moving into newer technologies and newer domains, not be hampered by code or design constraints, and just purely do conversational banking, right? Like, it's so powerful. Why are we not doing it already? So we want to leapfrog leapfrog into that new domain, and that's our ambition. And that's what we're going to do really in the next in the next few years. That's going to be dead and center. And I've had the luxury of having led this team, and therefore, the opportunity to actually build on what we've done so far. So that's going to be what I'll be doing at least for the next, hopefully, a couple of years.
For sure, Anand, I totally understand that most of the platform companies have like a services play. In fact,
Yeah.
your first team is the internal stakeholders who start using your platform, right? They dog food your product. At Haptic, I'd seen like when we built the chatbot platform, it was super difficult when we used to sort of have channel partners build chatbots on our platform, like back in the day, the first version. And we had like built our own like the product team split into like platform and services, and the services team had like a product engineer, like solutions architect of sorts, who
Yeah.
sort of build on the platform. So think of a product leader who's like leading a platform like at your level, and I'm essentially thinking there are multiple moving parts, there are multiple products, right? How do you lead and align diverse teams? Like there's a platform team which is looking at a product roadmap. And like there's a services team who would come to you because they are end users of your product. And there are your end clients like your banks, B2B2C, who are essentially coming up with their end like final requirements. And
Yeah.
you're essentially like trying to drive product program design towards a common goal, right? They're managing
Hmm.
multiple complex projects, right? Here, obviously,
Yeah.
prioritization is as the core of like every product management function and like team in any company. Having said that, I feel like managing platform services, it's like a can of worms, like very different set of
It
connotations.
is.
You're trying to manage
It
the
is.
platform and like how services are
Yeah.
essentially getting stuck at. So if you can
Yeah.
just uh, go deeper into how you manage this nuance and how does Zeta as a product function like try to like work along with.
Sure. Look, I think no, you're right. These are one is strictly in the problem space, the other is in the solution space, right? So it's fundamentally two different axes in which in which you tend to operate. Um, and quite frankly, zero to one is never a problem in situations like this because you've got one platform, one implementation. The platform gets designed to support this implementation. It's very happy, and things get happy. It gets incredibly tricky when you do three at a time, right? Because you've got three different implementations of your SaaS, each of whom take a slightly different journey. Everybody's problem is equally important, and then your platform has to support each of these things. So I think it's for me. Here's for me, the way I operate is that number one, you've got to primarily understand that somebody is operating in the problem space, who's operating in the solution space. And that distinction has to be incredibly clear because you've got to take an organizational view to this and then say, you know what, if I'm building something on my platform, it's the company's IP and I'm building it for the future. If I'm building something as a part of the implementation customization, it's IP that may not necessarily belong to me, right? And therefore, how I make money is in the short term. It's service revenue that I will sort of bring in. I will not bring in platform revenue in the future. So a lot of uh, thinking and decision making needs to happen where you're always on top of what your customers want, and you make a very clear decision what is built as a platform, what is built as a customization. Anything that gets built as a customization, you've got to be damn sure that this is something that you don't want to absorb into the platform for the long term, right? So that clarity is paramount when you operate in a model like this. The second is you've got to build a team of trusted people who you will blindly trust to make decisions for you, right? At least at an execution level. You need people who own the platform and who guard it like their life depended on it. You want to build an implementation team where every project manager for each of those implementations will bite your head off to make his customer win, right? And you've got the unenviable position of trying to balance between the two, but that's what you get paid for, right? That's your job. But you've got to build competence where when a platform team and an implementation team have a discussion, the third and the fourth time, the first two times you will mediate and then say this goes into platform, this goes to implementation, so on and so forth. The third and the fourth time, you almost get presented a decision for validation. Like, you know what? Yeah, we know how to think now. How does this work? We're going to absorb this. We're going to absorb that. The third more important element that comes into all this is how do you manage delivery when you're doing all this? It's very easy to say I'm going to build something in the platform. Oh, by the way, it'll come in JFM of next year. It doesn't work, right? And this is where management of tech debt is a very important aspect of things. Now, I fundamentally believe tech debt is not bad. I actually think it's a very powerful tool as long as you stay on top of it. So there are decisions that we take to say we will deliberately introduce tech debt. We'll say because you want it in the next 2 weeks, build it as a thin slice customization on the solution space. But I'm going to put it in the roadmap, and I'm going to ensure that my project line is such that when I get it built out, you will migrate this solution to the platform solution that will get built out later. And you've got to constantly stay on top of this, because otherwise you're not delivering real value to your customers. Because remember, your customers are still paying both SaaS fee and services fee, right? Like they pay for your implementation, they pay for your SaaS. Now, you can't force them to pay for implementation and keep maintaining that, because then you've got to migrate them to a SaaS model eventually. So a lot of work is ensuring that delivery balance. And somewhere like, and then you begin to wonder what is the product management aspect of what you're doing. And you get a lot of existential questions, but then coming back to your first point, you do what you need to do to get things done. It doesn't matter whether you're firefighting on a day or you're writing PRDs the other, but that's broadly how we tend to operate in terms of making product strategy decisions, in terms of making, or creating these win-win sort of situations for your customer as well as for your long-term platform and product.
Super interesting, Anand. Anand, you mentioned, delivery, you mentioned launch, and I want to dive deeper there with your experience in managing Zeta and managing products at Zeta, managing products at media.net. Talk to us about, how do you go about GTMing a product? Let's say you're working on a 0 to 1 sort of a problem statement, and now you want to, go to market with that product. How do you go about it? If you can talk from an operational aspect as well, and what are the nuances involved in it? Like what are the
Sure.
teams involved? How do you go about planning it?
Sure. So what I think you'll have to sort of take it with a pinch of salt, because most of this context will be relevant to sort of B2B or B2B2C
Exactly.
models.
Yeah.
And I think that may not be the same way that a B2C product manager would
Correct.
do their GTM work, right? So I think when it comes to B2B or B2B2C product management, unlike B2C product management, what you have to realize is that you don't have the luxury of taking too many bets, right? A/B testing is not something that is easy to achieve in a B2B setup, which means that your intuition as a product manager to build what is almost validated to a fault is extremely important. So in a sense, how you understand a particular industry, put the context of that industry to the needs of, let's say, one or two of your consumers or your customers, and then build on that becomes extremely important. And the reason why I made this point at the beginning when we talk about GTM is largely because it becomes in B2B implementation. And by the way, the other nuance is also places like Zeta, we're not a B2B company like Freshworks, where you have one variant of your product and then you can just take it and then, you've got a long tail of SaaS customers. We will literally, at best, we'll have like 50 customers in the world, right? And that has been tremendous success for us because of the volume of business that we get from each of these. When you're in a model like this, it's very important to realize that who you're selling to and who the consumer or the user of your product are necessarily different personas, right? So a lot of product work actually happens in a front-loaded manner, where you think of GTM when you start thinking of what to build, right? You understand, and I'll take the example. Let's take the example of, let's say you're building a credit card for super prime users, right? People who've got like really high credit scores, high net worth individuals, etc. When you're doing something like that, you've got to spend a lot of time in sort of understanding who are you going to market with. You're ultimately SaaS, which means that you need a consumer and a sponsor for your implementation. So who is your sponsor? And that becomes the point of sale. And who does this sponsor want to sell to? And that becomes your user base. You've got to understand both really well, right? And that's point number one. So GTM is actually in two parts. GTM is in part number one. How do you implement your product for your sponsor and purchaser? And number two, how do you roll out the product experience on behalf of the sponsor to its end customers? So it happens in two parts. Now, let's sort of look at the other end of the spectrum. Let's say, yeah, we've done our research, we've sort of agreed on what needs to be built. There's a plan in place, there's a roadmap in place, your platform supporting it, so on and so forth. The number one killer of B2B deals and renewals is poor product performance, right? Which is that you try something, it just doesn't work. The problem is, even though you may not have 100 million users doing the transactions and maybe 5 failures there doesn't really matter. With B2B models, the tolerance is really low. Even if you have 10 customers, or even if you have a 1% failure rate, that's unacceptable because it impacts critical functions of what's going on with the bank, etc. And typically, B2B2C products have, because there's a sponsor and because there's a seller, your go-to-market will actually involve two things. One, it'll involve adoption and training. So you've got a product. You need to teach your sponsor how to administer the product, right? You've got a bunch of back office applications. How do you create a card on your platform? What are the steps that you take? How do you diagnose a problem? How do you navigate through your portal? I want to launch a new card. What do I do? I want to do this. What do I do? How do I do user management on your platform? There's an incredible level of training and documentation that actually goes into B2B products when you actually sell and go to market. And product managers have to run that, right? Because unless you're able to, one of your personas that you solve for is actually your purchaser, the buying persona, right? The finance teams, the HR teams, who are not necessarily tech savvy, but they're still using a very technical product. So how do you train them? How good is your documentation? How good is your training program? Do you create the right modules? Do you have the right how-tos, etc.? So that is one part of GTM that sort of happens. And what we do at Zeta is we insist that our product managers do that. We actually insist that our product managers do a lot of the documentation work as well. It's very annoying for people because it's a lot of work. But the reason we do that is because it's a tremendous feedback loop for them, right? When they're writing, when they're documenting, they'll sort of realize, oh shit, what happens when I do this? Right? So that first time, like all the product managers that we work with, we've and I myself have done that, right? We've all written our product manuals, or product documentation, etc. Everything is done by us. I've run training modules. We insist that our PMs actually go meet the customer, run the training modules for them, etc. It's very structured. So a lot of that is subsumed by the product function, but it's extremely important for one of those personas. Now, when it comes to the second persona, which is rolling out the product to the market, you're actually in partnership with your sponsor. Okay. So like, for instance, let's take the work that we do at Zeta with HDFC Bank, right? HDFC Bank owns PayZapp. It's powered by Zeta. We power the entire experience. We built the entire thing. The 2.0 is from the Zeta stable. Now, does Zeta have any say in the way HDFC will do marketing for PayZapp? Not necessarily, because PayZapp will have its own brand. It has its own brand persona within the HDFC stable. They will have their commercial relationships with different agencies, etc., to do ATL, BTL, whatever marketing that needs to be done. However, with GTM and rollout, you have a role to play in ensuring that you support at that point of time, which is, let's say you're running a TVC, right? And you see PayZapp TVCs come out really soon with a bunch of celebrities, right? We've got to ensure that, and because you're going to get that spike in sort of adoption and downloads, you've got to ensure that the product is actually working at that point of time. The last thing you want to do is run a campaign and then sort of ensure that you're not your product doesn't live up to what it needs to do. So in the second leg of GTM, which is customer rollout, we play a supporting role. And that supporting role may be in the form of any sort of collateral that design marketing will have to create, but it is largely from a maintenance and ensuring that things are working fine, ensuring that you've got practices in place that will ensure that your product is smooth when you're running certain campaigns, etc. But to be honest, a lot of the marketing effort is actually done by the sponsor, and it has to be a role of the sponsor because um, you don't own the brand. As a SaaS player, you don't own the brand. We're very clearly the system of engagement. We're not the brand of engagement. So we'll play a role to support that. We'll play a role to support the branding exercises, etc. But beyond the point, we play a supporting role to our sponsors. Yeah.
Super details, man. Thank you for that checklist, like from support to documentation. I totally recollect multiple mistakes that we did. In fact, a lot of times when we used to document the how to use part of the manual, after like think of it as like release notes for a feature, there was this concept of nodes in a chatbot. Wherein I remember we had introduced newer type of nodes, and when I was writing the how to use, I realized that it's very complicated. I was getting confused, like, and then we realized
Yeah.
maybe have to like simplify how you set up a bot, and like we had these different sort of like stages also, like when you publish a chatbot to the internet, the chatbot that a lot of these companies have, they're like staging, pre-staging, and like
Yeah.
production. And when you're writing the documentation is when you realize maybe you can skip a bunch of these complexities. So it's
I
from
know.
the feedback loop perspective really helps the product manager writing the notes. Yeah. And support system for sure, like any product or feature that goes out live, you'll have to be like on your haunches for the first 2 weeks, if not more. Thank you, Anand. It's one of the most meatiest episodes I think Ankit and I have done, especially from a B2B platform perspective. I love that we covered like two different sectors, like fintech and AdTech. Like your massive experience really helps. I'm pretty sure, like I was just, whenever you're talking, I was thinking, hey, how many clips can we create out of this episode? Super helpful. Thank you for joining this. I think this is worth at least 2 months of content for the PM School social media channel. That's it.
No, pleasure to work with you guys anytime, and thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Anand.
Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye.